Good afternoon. Welcome to the, all right, we are going to get started since this is being live streamed. We're going to open with prayer, and then it's just going to be opening the floor for any questions you have about the merger. If you're going to come up here and talk, make sure you get nice and close to the microphone. Otherwise, if you want to stay where you are, we'll just repeat the question into the microphone. So we'll give the floor to Pastor.
We bow our heads and pray. Holy Spirit, Lord of the church, you brought us together through word and sacrament around the good news that Jesus Christ is our Savior. You gather us together in congregations to proclaim that message, to grow ourselves and proclaim it to those outside the church. As congregations over the last few years, we've been looking how we can do that better in our West Dallas area and proposing this unification of our congregations and our ministries, hopefully to carry out that great commission which you give to all of us. We ask you to bless our discussions today. We know we may not have all the answers, but you do, because all things are in your hands. So give us guidance today. May we learn, may we grow, and may we be energized in whatever way possible to carry out that wonderful message of salvation into our community. To that end, be with us and bless us. Amen.
All right, so once again, we're not going through the full presentation again. We have plenty of handouts in the back if you didn't bring yours with or if you hadn't had a chance to read through it yet. At this point, we just open the floor for any questions people have. And if it's quiet, this will be a short meeting.
Do you mind doing just a brief summary for those of us that haven't had the chance?
Sure. So the brief summary is we're talking about a merger with 3 congregations and 2 schools. We're talking about a split campus where some activities for the school would be on this campus, some would be at the Good Shepherd's campus. We'd be talking about finding a unified worship space at one of the 2 campuses, potentially converting one of the gymnasiums into a sanctuary space. From a budget point of view, the numbers were favorable that we'd be able to kind of stay where we are in the first year, but then realize some savings over the years. Selling Jordan would either incur a little bit of loss or a little bit of profit because the value of their building and the assets is about what they owe. So that's potentially a break-even proposition. As far as staffing goes, we're looking to keep long-term 3.5 pastors, and the short-term keeping all 5. It's kind of a 4.5 pastor position. Pastor Knazer was kind of the half that would be able to fill in. And then eventually, like I said, we would be looking to get down 1 pastor through the call process and whatever else. As far as teaching and all that, didn't really talk through any of that. That's kind of to be determined. There's a thought that all the teachers would have positions. As you're probably all aware, we have 2 open positions right now. Good Shepherds has 1 open right now. At the conclusion of next year, Good Shepherds will have another 1 open. So we're not thinking there's going to be any problems with that.
Do we know, ages of the split? Are you keeping all the kindergartners over there?
Yeah, so the question was if we know anything about the ages of the split for the school. The only thing that was proposed, just through conversation, that it was probably some sort of age division. So probably younger with the preschool would be on one campus, older would be on the other campus. Didn't really specify where that break would be, but it would probably be a split along those lines. But once again, that's ultimately the faculty and transition committee are going to figure out what works best for that. So we didn't want to really get into specifics.
So this vote actually isn't to go forward with anything specific other than what this was for?
Correct. So the question was, is the vote...
Or is this a vote to say we start the conversation right now? That's where I'm trying to...
Yeah. So the question is basically, what is the point of the vote? It's the binding vote. It's the final vote that says, if we vote no, we're done talking about this, the merger failed, and then we'll reconvene and figure out what the best course of ministry action is. If the vote is affirmative by all 3 congregations with a 2/3 majority, then we'll form a transition team to start figuring out all the logistics. Schools will do nothing different for the next school year based on school choice. That's already locked in. And so, yeah, we pretty much day 1 start figuring out what it means. And everyone is voting next Sunday, and we'll actually be the final vote just based off of our meetings at 1 o'clock. So.
When you say
All three congregations with the current voting membership, so male voters and, correct, correct. Yeah.
Just double check.
Yeah, Al?
We don't actually have the wording on the resolution we're voting on.
We do.
Come on, Julie, you can.
It was still being worked on yesterday, so.
Fun to watch me look through my phone. I will find it. We do have the wording. I basically say we're going to be voting to join together a new entity. We're going to vote to transfer all assets and liabilities to a new entity. We're going to be dissolving the other, three entities. It has to be 2/3 vote, and it has to be, all three have to agree, otherwise it nullifies. So if two voted, it doesn't mean they're merging. It's all three.
Will we be voting on, so let's say all three churches, 2/3 majority, we all decide, yes, we're gonna merge, then are we going to vote on, where to build the unified sanctuary, or is that the transition committee takes care of that?
Yeah, so the logistics are after the vote, that's where the transition committee would start to put together proposals. And then, because money's involved in everything else, there would be, I'm sure, quite a few new votes in the future, but the new votes then would be through the unified entity, not through the individual churches, because at that point, we'd be acting as a unified entity. Denise?
Do we still act as a single church? Are we going to carry on services here, same services over at Good Shepherd, New Jordan, what they involved? How is that going to work? I mean, if we're going to be one entity, but we have two different campuses.
So the question was basically, what would sanctuary and worship and everything else look like day one? The honest answer is we don't know. The pastors are going to get together and figure out the best course of action for that, because there might be some ministry opportunities to join together in the short term. The official verbiage of the motion, I did find it, was we're going to enter into unified with the affirmation churches. We're going to assign all the assets and liabilities to the unified entity. We're going to formally dissolve. We're going to continue to operate the congregations as the wind-down operations are needed. So basically, from when the vote happens until everything flips the switch to the new entity in full, everything has to keep operating as is. We're going to create a transition team. It'd be 2 members from each of the churches. And then, like I said, it's the 2/3 majority, and then, of course, the nullification. So it's not like day one we're all of a sudden going to start going to a different church. We're going to start talking, and like I said, that'll be the ministry team, the pastors and all are going to start figuring out, does everything stay the same for a while? Do we start, maybe have Monday night service at one church, Saturday on another? Who knows? Pastor?
And obviously, we'll have to get a lot of legal advice on how to do that. Because in a sense, you can't be a new entity until you have a constitution that's ready to be adopted. So, don't think this is going to take 2 months. This may be 6, 9 months, especially with the school staying separate for that first year. This is not going to happen overnight.
To repeat it just for the streaming, is Pastor Knazer was stating that this is a legal process too, so a lot of the schedule would be determined on what it takes to create the new entity, and it might be 6, 9 months. We don't really know how long it's going to take for all that. Jess?
My impression had been that we aimed to worship together as a large group as soon as possible, and that we were kind of leaning towards, not officially, but leaning towards using one of the gymnasiums and transforming that space to be a worship space so that we could worship together as soon as possible, even not necessarily waiting until the switch is flipped.
Yeah, so Jess's question was basically, during some of the earlier presentations from M4M, one of the stated goals was to worship as a unified entity kind of from day one. I don't know that that's the exact stated goal. We are certainly looking for that unified space, but if we're talking about renovating or converting a gymnasium, that could take weeks or months. We also have to remember that we're using that for the school right now, and so that may prove a challenge for the schedule as well. So that's one of the reasons I was taken off as one of the, kind of the day one goals, but that was certainly something we had talked about from that Better Together presentation last year. Yeah, John?
This question is just going down a little bit different path, but I think it's primarily for the past, is the ministry plan that was
Whomever, just come to the microphone, please.
That's a good point, John, and you're not the only one that has asked about that more detail as far as ministry goes. A lot of it was outlined in the Better Together document from a year ago, as far as the kind of visions we wanted for outreach and worship and things like that. We also have talked about all the 5 pastors that we've taken the strengths finders, to find out which areas of ministry we're best suited for, and we have the group from the Synod, Grace in Action. Grace in Action, it would be brought in to help us develop that. So specific plans, I mean, you've got, administrative pastor and outreach pastor, counseling pastor, visitation pastor. I'm real happy with the visitation pastor. I'm ready to roll on that one. But the other 3 is division of duties. Who's going to have, which of the pastors is going to have what? That's going to take us, a while to sort that out. But, we've got thoughts on who can help us do that and getting that kind of help. I know that's not real specific for you, but follow up, John?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I understand the complexities that are surrounding that, but I think it is what we're here to talk about is ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these other things that come along. Another question that my wife and I have a little bit of struggle with is the consideration of why we need to worship in one of our gymnasiums. And I get the numbers. I'm pretty clear on that, but I think if you truly look at the numbers, as I understand here, you're looking at maybe downstream, you're looking at a 1,200 member church with half of that membership worshiping on a regular basis weekly and divided by a number of services. I'm not, personally, I don't see the challenge that we're going to be faced with in terms of worshiping either, whether it's Good Shepherd's sanctuary or ours. I'm struggling a little bit, frankly, with why we would spend money on a gymnasium that we're going to need for school operations. There's an indication that that we would use the gymnasium where the lower grades were. Well, if I have a first grade student, I want that my student to be participating and be able to use the gymnasium. So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with those numbers. It doesn't seem to be that at least initially we would have any problem at all maintaining our specific worship in these facilities. And Pastor, one thing I'd like to ask you, just because you're the numbers guy, were 250 comfortable with all our pews missing up front?
No. I mean, in this area, we don't have a sign up, but we're figure 8 a pew times 22 pews, 23 pews. What is that, 180? Somewhere in the ballpark with 180?
And I would also think...
And Good Shepherd's is only a little more than that, so.
And I also think, going back to the ministry plan, that our considerations need to be heavily vetted in looking at how we are going to minister to this community differently. And that's not less services as what I read here. This reads to me like less services. We need to have, in my humble opinion, more services at more distinct times for people that work, for young people that work third shift, for people that are working at different times. So while it's wonderful to have 300 people at a service, I think we're a long way from that. And I think the ability for us as a ministry here in West Dallas to look at those options is going to continue to drive us to have more services and alternative type services that will fit very nicely into sanctuaries that we've spent significant resources on in the last decade here. So I'm just would like to be on the record that I just do not understand why we need to be looking at a gymnasium for worship.
Okay.
I'm interested in input from you on that.
Just for the value of the people online, the comment has been that, why we can't, because we may be adding different types of services that, in addition to the 4 that we have now, that the sanctuary space would be sufficient at one place or another, and then also the loss of a gymnasium wherever the younger children are. Just to address that part of it, this room would, the early discussion is that this room would be converted into the play area for the smaller kids. I mean, that's the early discussion.
So we would
Play.
convert this sanctuary into a playground? I just want clarification on that.
Yeah,
Effectively, that's it. You got to remember, these are just people ask the same questions you ask, people come with the same answers. So, from the group that talked about it, that was one suggestion: is if we move the sanctuary into the gymnasium space, and let's say this was the campus that had the lower grades, that we could turn this into an indoor play space for the children, because without the pews and all this, it is a significant space for running around. Clearly, not doing basketball or something like that, but it was one of the proposals.
Yeah. Is there am I missing something in our past in terms of the numbers, in terms of looking at a 1,200 member congregation with 500, with half of that attending on a weekly basis divided by 4 or 5 services? Again, I'm struggling to see how we would not be able to fit those folks into this space. Am I off on my numbers or not?
I don't know if you're off in your numbers yet. Yeah, I mean, clearly, if you did a straight linear, but we know the attendance on like a Monday night is not going to carry the same attendance on a Sunday or Saturday night. And once again, like I said, we don't want to get too bogged down in the nuances of that, because, like you said, maybe we find that a fifth service that's a contemporary only makes sense. We didn't go into all those details quite yet. Hey, yeah, Jess, did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, in response to some of your questions, first of all, regarding the worship planning, one of the big things that's going to change to help.
You want? I feel like you're going to have more to say than I want to repeat.
Okay, so first of all, one of the things that's going to change going on in the future, besides the Grace in Action coming in to help the pastors decide who should be in what position and whatnot, is the addition of a business manager, a property manager, a worship planner, all of these supplementary positions that are going to enable the pastors to focus more on what they're doing and not be so stretched thin. So the addition of those positions is one of the biggest changes that I think is going to enable pastors to really focus and have great ideas and move forward without all of those other responsibilities that aren't necessarily what their calling needs to be. Regarding the numbers in the sanctuary, because I've been watching some of the other open forums as well, and that has been brought up. Technically, yes, you could probably have 4 services and fit the 1,000 to 1,200 people in this sanctuary or Good Shepherd sanctuary or whatever it is. But that is a community-based decision, because when we have visitors, articles have been written or studies have shown that when a church is higher than a 70% capacity, someone who's never been here before is going to feel crowded, and they're going to feel like it's too many people. So you don't want every pew shoulder to shoulder full, or people are not going to be comfortable coming to this new congregation. We want to give them space. We want to make sure that that 70% full ballpark number is going to enable people to be more comfortable joining, and that's a totally community visitor mindset. So we don't want to be totally full. We want to have room to grow. We always want to have room to grow. So that's the gymnasium mindset too. So those are some comments I had.
Well, then why not have more services? I mean, why are you jamming everybody into a Sunday morning service?
Sorry, Damon. I do. I personally think that I've been part of this congregation for 6 years, and I don't know everyone, and it took me a really long time to feel a part of this congregation, because it took me so long to get to know people. I would love for us to, especially in these first few years or months or whatever it might take, to be together and see those faces more often, especially towards the beginning, so that we can become a unified congregation rather than just separate into little groups. Otherwise, we're just going to be the early church people and the late church people. We want to have unity.
And I think that's honorable, and I think that's an excellent goal. I think the reality in society today is that we will fail if we do not provide alternatives to worship, and that's what's happened to our church, and that's why we're in the situation we're in now. Our attrition rate is horrific. Our attendance by young people, by young people that have been part of this congregation for generations, what we have those attritions, we're not offering the opportunity for them to get here. So by tightening that up, we reduce that even more. I'm not disagreeing, and I would never disagree with the fact that we'd certainly like to have a full church
Can I just want one closing thought on that. With all of the presentation we're doing here, somebody said we need more information. So we got together with these subcommittees. We spent, half a year or whatever it was, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And we put together a vision of what this could look like. Ultimately, any decision moving forward is going to be the role of the new entity. And so if we go in the new entity and we say, how do we want to do worship? And they come up with, I want to have 3 Sundays and a Saturday and a Wednesday and a Monday, then that's what it's going to be. So we're not saying it's 4 services in the traditional sense you're seeing at this one new position. It was a presentation of what the ministry could look like. If everyone gets together and has the same feeling that we need to have a dedicated contemporary service, we need to have a midweek service, whatever people think might be suitable, we'll vote and talk about that. I do have, before I let you go to finance, a few other people raising their hands, so I'm going to try and button up this topic.
Really quick, so from my understanding of talking with, one of the secretaries or whatever, our main goal in the gym, sanctuary or whatever, is basically to unify all the churches together. That's the main goal, so that we can become one strong church body. So that has nothing to do with cutting down services, that just has to do with, this is why we want to have it at one campus or the other, so that we become a unified community. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, the question was about using the gym space. And it is, to have a sanctuary large enough to hold a service larger than we can hold now without feeling like we're bursting at the seams, setting up chairs in the aisles and stuff like that. So, but it's definitely to unify and get us all worshiping together. Mrs. Wendorf?
So, to John, I understand that we want to reach out to as many people to give the opportunity for people to worship when they don't get the chance. But as a parent of a daughter who's 16 years old, she has grown up knowing that church is her number one responsibility. But if she has a job on a Sunday, she tells her place she works for, I cannot work on Sundays. It's just the way it is. It's the way I was growing up. I grew up, and I know a lot of people and young children that's how, even in the school that have older siblings at Wisco and everything, they make their relationship with Christ and the church their most important thing. So to say, no, they can't get to these places, their obligations might be a little mixed up. And I understand as an adult that you have jobs and you have to work the shifts you're doing. I'm just saying, we're not going to make every single person happy.
If you guys are willing, can you come talk at the microphone? That way people online can hear.
I take exception to that. With all due respect, there's a number of people in this room, and there's a number of people in this community that work in a number of occupations.
I didn't say that.
Yes, you did.
No, what did I say?
Whether it's law enforcement, whether it's healthcare,
I
there's a
said,
number of
as an
different,
adult,
there's a
I
number of different
understand.
opportunities. And
Okay.
to suggest-
We're kind of devolving here.
To suggest a deficiency in their faith
That's not, I was
is
not
not
talking
fair.
about adults.
It is absolutely not fair.
My,
It is absolutely not fair.
All right. Let's move on to the next question, please. I don't want to. Yes, Denise?
It seems like people don't realize that we've been talking about these different things, like what can we do for the young adults, what can we do for, the people between 18 and 30. This is all, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I think this is going to give us the opportunity where we have somebody that is in that position. Okay, these 2 pastors are so thin with their time. They can't concentrate on this and concentrate on that, there's just too much. So once you get those other positions filled, then I think all that will fall into place.
Correct, yeah. One of the strengths of having a larger ministry with more pastors, more dedicated staff and all that is to be able to address other areas that, not for lack of wanting, but just for lack of execution that we haven't been able to do over the
We
years.
haven't been able to do it.
Correct.
It's always there in our evangelism.
Correct.
We talk about this all the time.
Yeah, and the change with anything we talk about is only going to happen if we step up and do it, because it's been the conversation people have asked throughout this whole process. You guys have all these great ideas, why aren't you doing them now? So, we have to change our mindset. We have to enable our resources to have the time to do the different things, and that as congregation lay members, we're going to have to all step up as well. Yeah. Yes, all administrative positions that were outlined here are paid positions, absolutely. Yes, they're all paid, they're all in the budget with benefits and everything else, yeah.
So is it already worked in the budget that what these are gonna cost? Because it sounds like the overhead is gonna be.
Correct, yeah. So all the positions that have been proposed in here were put into the budget. That's why some of them would have been, phase 1 budget, some would have been like this phase 2 budget. But yeah, they're all definitely budgeted positions because, yes, clearly, we can't have volunteers trying to do this. These are full-time positions.
That's also why they're talking not liquidating, but getting rid of, or selling Jordan.
Yeah, selling Jordan is just we don't need 3 buildings. They have some debt that they need to flatten out. So that's why we're talking about selling Jordan. All right, go ahead, John, with your finance questions.
So, as I look at there's a kind of a comment in the reporting that financially this makes sense. And I think in the big picture, I don't disagree with that at all. Am I correct in reading it that the first 3 years, including this year, would be a deficit budget, correct?
So we are already at a deficit budget. So that was one of the things that I don't know if it translated very well with the presentation. All 3 congregations operate with a deficit budget, and we handle it in different ways. So at Woodlawn, we handle our deficit budget through endowment gifts, through planned withdrawals from a savings account. So, we have a deficit budget. Ours might appear more funded than other congregations because, like I said, we do have dedicated endowment funds. Some of the other churches had similar situations. Some were, like Jordan, was pulling their money out of a portfolio, and that's one of the reasons that they're kind of operating in that situation they're in. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be worse of an operating expense than we have right now, and then we actually expect we'll see savings once the Jordan property is sold and we start to unify.
So I think just from a transparency perspective for everybody, there's just a couple of things that I just want to clarify. And this is not negative and or positive, it's just factual. The financial numbers that were run indicate a flat line of income for this year, next year, and the following year. So for 3 years, a flat line of income and no attrition.
Correct, yeah, and this was talked about at the last presentation. They specifically left the income flat, and they didn't figure in for attrition, but then they also didn't figure in for increased offerings or anything else. So they needed a working number, so they just kind of left that all where it was for the next 3 years.
I think, though, it is important from a transparency perspective, to share that with people that the likelihood of a flatline income across the course of the next 3 years is probably relatively low. The other concern there is, and that's why when I communicated with the executive committee, I was looking for a variety of looks at the financial picture so that we can look at best case and worst case scenario. And I think it's just important to know that we're looking at best case scenario. I think the fact that they consider no attrition is probably not reasonable. I think the other concern I have is that, especially at Woodlawn, if you look at attrition, we have a 10% attrition rate. The financial attrition rate will be higher than that because there's a disproportionate amount of folks in that 10% in terms of their giving. So that 10% of attrition may represent 20% of giving.
And that's one of the reasons that they didn't want to try and budget this because
But I think it's just, not to interrupt you, but I think it is important because we are looking at a deficit budget for the next couple of years. So that the picture looks good financially, but yet with deficit budgeting. The other thing that it takes into consideration is that we definitely sell Jordan. And, so if we take attrition, we don't sell Jordan, the financial picture does not look real good. And I think those are not, I don't think those are blue sky reaches there that we could have attrition in the rate of 10% and that Jordan doesn't sell in the first 3 years. I think that's reality. And I think we have to face reality when it comes to the financial picture. So I just wanted to make sure. The other question I had was on the summarized assets and liabilities. There is loans of $852,000, so there's some outstanding loans besides what Jordan has, I assume?
correct. So the question was about on the summarized asset, it showed 800 and what was the liability? 852. Yeah, that was Good Shepherd's, and then Jordan was the majority of it. But, yeah, it included Jordan.
So Good Shepherd has a couple $100,000 in debt, paper loan or?
Yeah, so the the Jordan deficit was to 672. out of that 852. It would have been on the next page that would itemize the Jordan, and the rest would have been like the Good Shepherd's debt.
And what does the $195,000 in payables represent?
Al, do you know that one?
What page are you on, John?
Page 18.
Oh, and payables? The question was, Al, maybe you know this, what the 195,000 of payables was for the overall asset and liability.
I think that's just operating expenses that are accrued and haven't been paid for yet. So it's just at any point in time, you probably have, you know, liabilities or payables like, one of our big ones is for the property insurance, property and liability insurance here. You know, we're covered for the whole year, but we make, you know, in our case, semi-annual payments, so, you know, we actually owe for the whole thing, but we haven't actually paid it all yet. Either.
Yeah, which I understand the 195 seems like a pretty high number for the, could is payroll in there, you think, Al, or? Seems like a high number for insurance and.
It also shows we have $882,000 in cash, which I'm guessing is not sitting under anyone's mattress. So some of this is the numbers in and numbers out, that this is just kind of a snapshot.
I believe so.
So I guess the other, you know, that, it sounds to me like, you know, one of the, I wouldn't necessarily say a concern, but again, it's just an element of transparency to folks. If I understood the way the vote is going to be next week, it will be that this group will be assuming that liability. So it's not just a merge of churches and members and ministry and all that. It is a merge of liabilities.
Correct. We are voting on a merge of assets and liabilities. Absolutely.
They have to take care of that.
Correct.
Take care of that debt. So that you know, that amount of money is, I just want everybody to be perfectly clear about that. It seems a little bit buried in the discussion.
Correct, yeah. We're voting on assets and liabilities, so everything's getting put together. What other questions do we have?
I just want to make a little bit of a statement.
Do you want to do it in the mic, or you want to?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
I can talk loud if you want.
It won't pick up.
No, I'm not a numbers person, never have been, don't ever want to try to be. I'm more of a take a leap of faith kind of person, and if we keep going down the rabbit hole we're going down now, as far as, I agree, like offering more services and things like that, I really think we should have a regular contemporary service. I think we bring in a lot of people that are going more to the non-denominational churches because they, like, you know, whatever, I don't want to go down that, but I'm just saying, like, I think we do need to make that an option as one of our services. But also, like I said, if we keep going the way we're going, we're not changing anything. So if we decide not to merge with these other churches and take that leap of faith, and hopefully everything will kind of sort itself out and we'll work together to make it better so that we're not $1 million in debt or whatever. I just think it's worth considering also that let's make a change, because I know from a school aspect, it's really nice to work with some of the families over at Good Shepherds, because I'm like, oh, and Jess can probably attest to this too, it's nice to get an opinion of, hey, we tried this fundraiser to get money for our school, you guys should try this, or hey, we've gone to, you know, it's nice to get different aspects and different views from different people, and I think our congregations joined together could make a difference in this community, which I know is the end goal for all the congregations, whether together or not, but maybe if we put our heads together as one big group, we might have a better impact in the community. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I absolutely agree that the whole reason we're talking about this is because we think we can put together a unified entity that can accomplish more than we have been doing as the three separate congregations. And as far as the liability thing, John, the other thing I want to talk about is, although we don't legally have the liability of Jordan, because of our actions with the school, it is sort of ours in some extent because we need Jordan to run our school. If they all of a sudden, went belly up and closed as a school, we're in a difficult position. So, I understand, Woodlawn has a different fiscal thought process than some of the other congregations. I don't know how long it's been since we've had debt, so I know that taking on any debt can be something that's a little bit alarming or concerning, but yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to that. Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, the assumption of, as Pastor Schultz would so eloquently put it, there's nothing wrong with debt and money. It's what you do with debt and money that's important. So the only reason I bring that information more to the surface is that we just have to take a responsible approach to that so that we can, I don't think any of us want to be in a position where we have to not keep up with a promise and a commitment that we make. And the promise and commitment here is pretty significant. And that needs careful, thoughtful consideration, and we need to really seek good counsel on it because it's a significant piece of debt. We just need to be cautious of that. I mean, anytime anybody, whether it's a family or a business or a church or a congregation or a synod takes on debt, doesn't mean it's wrong. It simply means that it has to be well. I think that one other question that I had just from the executive committee, maybe the pastors, was in one of my communications I had asked if we had looked at alternatives to what we're talking about here today. And that alternative is not staying where we're at. I think there's a presumption that if we didn't do this, we could stay doing what we're doing. But my question is whether or not other options were looked at a higher level here as opposed to just this merger.
Yeah, so the question was basically, obviously we were voting on a merger. Did we look into other options or other plans to move forward? I'll say no. I mean, we've certainly talked about other options, but the emphasis of this project is to decide if this is the right option to move forward. So that's what we've been focusing our energy on. I know over the last few years, certainly we've looked into combining different programs with teen and sports have been combined for quite some time. So there's certainly been other areas of joint ministry through the schools and the churches that have been done, but yeah, this whole conversation was really focused around, is this the right plan? We didn't want to put forth 26 different plans. We're starting with maybe the most aggressive plan, and we're going to find out, is this what people want to do? And if ultimately the vote is no, then clearly stuff still has to change. So then we're going to go and investigate a different plan. But yeah, this was definitely focused all around that primary, what we've been talking about. Denise.
Isn't the whole goal in the worship period in how we can get together and spread the word?
Correct. The Great Commission's the big goal of all of this, absolutely.
That's really what our goal is. And I think as far as the money, I'm not worried because I trust God. And I trust that He will guide us in the right direction. But I can only do that through prayer. So I think that's really important, that we take this through prayer and go through this whole thing. Prayer is very, it works.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to do.
Absolutely, yeah. We're trusting in God with all this. And when it comes to the money, I mean, even as a single congregation, we budget, we plan for the best. We plan for the best of what we're going to get in offerings. We prepare for the worst if we don't through our savings accounts and everything else, and then we trust in the Lord. We're trying to do the same thing now, only taking 3 different budgets, or 5 if you count the 2 schools as separate budgets. And so, yeah, there is a lot of things. You'll notice that when we looked at all the valuations, we tended to err on the side of the lower valuations. We weren't trying to say we're going to get 1.2 million, we're going to say we're going to get 800 or something like that. So we tried to be, err on the side of income being lower than we thought, expenses being higher, and then, hope that you put forth a good budget. So, like I said, the people that put this together are all the finance peoples from the 3 congregations and schools. So, yeah, we are trusting in their opinions, but, yeah, Jenny?
Well, there's something to be said that if we are, our congregation has been
And Brian Wicklund, when he presented for our congregation, did talk about the goal is towards getting into balanced budgets and not just doing deficit budgets and hoping that the savings we have or the endowment funds or everything else to actually be able to live off of our plate offering. So that's definitely everyone's goal. I don't think it was necessarily, yeah, we should live in debt all the time. It's just realizing the situation of where we are right now. And to that end, if we got to the point where there's a new property that makes sense, the chance of us being able to transition to a new property without taking on debt is probably unrealistic. So there's going to be a point where, we'd have to take that conversation and say, okay, if we want to get to that phase 3 of a unified location and this X amount of debt, is that something we're all comfortable with? So.
Also, when we had that meeting at Wisco before the world went crazy, they would be part of like transitioning us also?
No, I don't know.
Once it just kind of got the ball rolling.
Yeah, so Pastor Hein had ran that meeting, and he was helping us through the merger decisions. We may very well talk to him again as things move forward. Wisco was just picked as a location to hold that, but we definitely want to reach out to other people. We certainly don't pretend to know everything we would need to know about how to move forward legally with all this and what all the best practices are. We certainly have some sample communities in the area that have accomplished this, so we'd reach out to them. We'd talk to the Wells, like they said, the Grace in Action Committee. There's a lot of different things that we'd be reaching out to because we don't pretend to have all the answers.
I just didn't know if we would continue working with.
John Hein, yeah. I don't know that we've reached out to him in the last couple months, but we probably would talk to him again once we figure out what's going on because he was pretty instrumental in getting to where we were, and then we kind of hit pause, and the next phase would have been tactical, and that's where I think we could definitely use some more assistance. Jess?
There was a guy at the Synod, Paul Patterson, who helps with the school merger, and that's his experience, and he'll help guide the school part through it. I don't know much about the church.
Correct, yeah. Paul Patterson is someone you'd reach out to for the school.
I didn't think it'd be a resource, but I just wanted to.
Yeah. Other questions or thoughts?
Jamie, we've got an online question from Joel Davis.
Sure.
It says, the plan is very focused on property and finances, and then there's a few questions here. What will the leadership structure be? Who will decide this?
Sure, I'll answer that one first.
What is the time frame for this work? And then most importantly, how will ministry be different and, dare I say, better together?
So the first thing is, what would the new leadership be? What we've talked about so far is just presenting 2 people from each church as a transition team, just to move forward and figure all this out. Obviously, we're talking about trying to combine 3 different churches' constitutions, 3 different churches' concepts of coordinating boards or subcommittees or whatever you want to call the different action groups, obviously figuring out the council and everything else. So we definitely would have to construct what the leadership would look like. The time frame, except we don't really have a time frame. We have phases. There's certainly an expectation that the ministry efforts would get started talking about that right away. The school would have to start talking about that right away because we're talking about basically having 1 school year to figure all this out before we join together. Ultimately, a lot of time frame is going to come on the legal decisions too, knowing what needs to be done, knowing how do we handle all this. Do we have to sell Jordan first? There's lots of different questions there. So we don't have a specific time frame. That's, like I said, gets into more of the tactical side. All we would know is that we'd get started on the process sooner versus later. As far as the ministry being better together, that's sort of what we've been talking about with having the extra pastors dedicated to the different areas of expertise, creating the additional support staff within the business and technology and administration within the school and church to make sure we can handle a larger congregation, that we can handle outreach better, stuff like that. But a lot of this is going to come back to some things we talked about in earlier presentations, the courageous evangelism, us as members going out and talking our church up to people, inviting people. We're not going to change by just doing stuff differently within these 4 walls. So it's going to be what we've been talking about for the last 4 years of, we have to come up with a plan and execute it. And like I said, there's things that we're great at and there's things that we clearly need some guidance on, and we'll go through each one of those different items and figure out where all the shared expertise is and come up with plans to make this better. Is there another question, or did I answer them?
Yeah, there's another follow-up question from Joel Davis.
Sure.
Why didn't we engage Pastor Hein to finish the merger process with us, especially since his help was so vital?
I think when we left, the question was basically why didn't we keep Pastor Hein involved in the last 3 to 6 months when we were doing these subcommittees. Where we had left off with Pastor Hine was we were going to have the vote last year. We had talked about different phases, and it kind of got to a point where we originally were proposing we took the vote before we had any details, and there was some pushback from the congregations that they wanted some more details. And so at that point, I don't think Pastor Hine really felt he had the value in figuring out those details, because he doesn't care how the merger happens. He wants it to be whatever we want. He wants to help the process. And so when we got to the point where we're kind of going into the details of our finances and all that, that wasn't something that necessarily had any advantage to having Pastor Hine involved. As we switch away from that and we get back into the tactical of how do we make a merger, how do we do all this other stuff, that's where I think we would engage him again, because that's once again the next part where he had some expertise to offer. So I think it was just because, like I said, we were trying to focus on presenting what our current vision was going to be and what our current picture looked like.
And then there's a comment from Margaret Trissel. We already touched on this, but I just want to mention it. I also hope the gym space won't be taken away from the children of that site.
Yeah, and that reaches to a few different points. When we talk about a split campus, I don't think anyone says the split campus is really what we're looking for, that we think this is the best path forward. We understand that it's kind of a short-term solution while we look for a unified space. Nobody likes the idea of having to have half the school at one location, half the others. They talk about plenty of different programs that are done throughout the school that would have to be reimagined or canceled until we were back on the unified campus, with things where the upper grades are hanging out with the lower grades, chapel buddies, reading buddies, stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of challenges with having a split campus. There's a lot of challenges with having, like we said, when you talk to anyone, you say, okay, we're going to take these beautiful sanctuaries and we're not going to use them, and now we're going to go convert the gym space into a sanctuary. Even if we do the best job we can, there's still people that are feeling like, well, why did we do this? Now we can't use this for school. And so, like I said, we certainly understand that there are concerns, and that's why we're presenting this. We didn't want to vote, and then all of a sudden we put this action plan together, and people are like, whoa, you didn't talk about that. So that is, like I said, it's one of the more aggressive thought processes to take the sanctuary, turn it into a different space, take the gymnasium, turn it into a sanctuary. But it's one proposed idea that was the least cost method of doing it with our existing campuses. So if you start talking about blowing out the sanctuary that way or this way, now what maybe is a $50,000 or $100,000 project turns into millions. So that was one of the reasons that we were trying to pick kind of the lowest cost way to accomplish our goals for this phase 2 ministry, which is having the 2 schools operating. Yeah.
Maybe just related to that point, someone made the comment about investing that money in transforming the gym into a sanctuary while at the same time searching for a neutral site, so to speak, and that doesn't seem like a wise investment.
So the question, it sounds like, is basically why would we spend money on transforming what we have if we're actively looking for something else in the short term? And maybe the ultimate idea is that we won't do that. Once again, we're leaving that up to the new entity, because now we're talking about significant investment. I think we are definitely from day one looking for that new unified space. I don't think our goal is to sit idle for the next 3 years or 5 years or whatever and then start looking. We're already, and this was covered in the presentation, we've already been reaching out to some different community properties. Some were the old Jordan, there's the Lane Middle School. So there's a few that were already outlined in that presentation that we're looking into. And yeah, if one of those looks like it's a plan and maybe it would happen sooner versus later, then I think the argument against converting that space would probably come to fruition. But like I said, we're just trying to answer the question. If somebody says, how can we do a unified sanctuary? That's how we can do it. If ultimately we decide that having 6 services, 3 at this campus, 3 at the other campus makes the most sense, then that's what we're going to decide as a unified body. But once again, we're not putting that forth. Our motion is just, should we join? All the different details are going to have to be voted on by the new congregation.
Jim, I have a personal question or a follow-up question to Pastor's statement there. You talked about an acquisition of Lane School and or the Grace Christian Academy. Aren't those places currently occupied?
Yep. Yeah, both of those places are occupied. They're just thoughts. Lane School was brought up because back in the day, it was something that Good Shepherd had looked into, and with West Allis talking about there's some sort of new vote thing here coming up in April, that there's possibility that properties would be coming into the market. So just reaching out to see what's possible. Same with Grace, it was just like, well, we used to have this, maybe our property is more suited for them, their property is more suited for us, and we do some sort of swap. So these are just thought process to prove that there's something out there, and it's not buying Sam's Club property and building a new church or something else, and we're kind of looking at things that were already in that school and or church usage. But yeah, it's more answering the question, is something possible in West Dallas without having to buy green space and start from scratch?
Yes, I was just wondering, like, what is our diameter of, like, how many miles out from the churches are we looking at? Obviously.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, it's the city of West Dallas, and I would say probably the western side of West Dallas. So that's what our search criteria is.
Try to stay in this area, basically.
Yeah, definitely staying in this area. And then, there are other options in play, and that's why if you look in the presentation, you can see the acreage of all the different campuses. There are, personal dwellings or, by the Good Shepherd's property, I think they have, 5 houses or something like that. So there are other opportunities to do more aggressive if we ultimately decide that we want to stay on one of these 2 campuses. Well, then we look at how we best use the space on these campuses. But, yeah, and like I said, all that's outlined in that paper presentation. Any other questions? You have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, maybe. Thanks for all the discussion and comments. I'm going to go back to where we started, and that was with ministry. John, you mentioned, unchurched people are looking for different worship styles, and where we're going with ministry to try to get there. And, for a congregation of 450 to try a lot of that stuff on our own, and another congregation of 600 to try it on their own. And, you brought up Muskego, and they're 2,400, so they're double what we would envision, or 5 times bigger than where we're at now. And the pooling of the resources that hopefully would be taking place with this merger would give us the creativity, the ideas, and the manpower to try and get into some of those things. We've laid out, the groups that were meeting before the pandemic, where we put together the Better Together. Well, that was even in early days of the pandemic too, with the Better Together document that we, distributed and discussed 2 years ago. I think that gives us a framework for those kinds of things. But yeah, we need to be imaginative. We need to like I say, pool the resources that we have and borrow some from others as well, to see what we can accomplish. We may try 5 things and only 2 work, or whatever the case might be. But to try and do that where each of us is at today, I think would be difficult. People would like more, concrete ideas, whether it comes to finances, ministry, and that. We've got resources that we can bring in to help us do that, and I'll hang around long enough so that we do some of those things. But as I've said a couple of times, I'm in favor of this merger. I know there's lots of questions. I don't understand all the finances. I know, Al has been as helpful as he can be, and appreciative of that. The folks at Good Shepherd, Mark, what's his last name? No, not Keither, their treasurer, who's going to be the new finance professor at Wisconsin Lutheran College. Or is it Mike? Mike Strubling. Mike Strubling, okay. Stroutman, yeah, okay. And Brian Wickland, if there's anybody that's got a handle on our numbers, maybe can't always explain them to this as well as we could, simply understand them, but he's got a handle on those numbers too. And if you want to talk about, get more clarity on the numbers, those would be the 2 guys to go to, John. I don't know if you have had that conversation, or any of us really. But, so Denise mentioned trust. And, there are people in each of the congregations with whom we can place our trust. And obviously we know especially with whom we can place our trust. Yes, there's lots and lots of details that are going to have to be worked out. But I think it would be worth our effort to go down that course.
So then I guess as far as any sort of next actions, we're going to have the vote on the following Sunday at 1 p.m. We are going to do a paper ballot with the full read-in motion. that we'll vote on. We also then do have a couple of vote activities for calling a first and second and a third and fourth grade teacher, so we do expect that meeting probably to go a little bit longer just because there's going to be a few different topics to discuss. But feel free, reach out to me, any of the pastors with any questions. We have that paper, what are we calling it, the Pulse Survey. If you haven't filled that out, is there still time or did it close down? Yeah, there's still time to fill that out. We will be sharing all that with the voters, what the pulse of the congregation was. We'll be sharing the comments and all that at the voters meeting. So that was why we did, have that opportunity. Denise? How soon will we know? So we're the last to vote. I'm not sure if I'm going to get emails from the other church congregations immediately, but we'll know that day, I'm certain, and we're going to talk amongst ourselves to figure out, are we doing just a thumbs up, thumbs down, what we're going to share, but we will get in short order a message out through the emails, and of course it'll be part of the announcements. Sure, you can call me on Sunday. I have caller ID. I'll either answer or not. So yeah, we'll know on Sunday, and then we'll be sharing everything, and of course sharing next steps, depending on how the merger vote goes.
I just want to say God bless you to everybody that's been involved in this. I know it's been a hard road.
Oh, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All has done.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Anything else?
Question.
Yeah, Jeff.
All the 3/4 majority,
2/3, but yes.
I'm sorry, 2/3. Is that in each congregation or all voting members?
Correct. Each congregation has its own 2/3 majority that has to pass, and all three congregations have to pass for the merger to go through. So yeah, it's a 2/3 of the present voting members.
And Jaden, that's 2/3 of the voters present?
Correct. Yep, 2/3 of the present voters, absolutely. Yeah, we weren't going to change the Constitution at this point, but so that's, other than, once again, making it 2/3 because it's a very significant vote as opposed to the simple majority with most of our motions. All right, well then I thank everyone for your time. Like I said, feel free to reach out with any other questions, and we look to see as many of you as possible next week.